it does seem, I mean, I haven't seen public opinion, but if you look at the news reports of people doing in the street interviews in New York or wherever, it seems like many Venezuelans are happy. Do you think that's a misperception? Do you think that's a correct perception? Which Venezuelans do you think are happy, which are not? And how do you make sense of that?
I mean, I think obviously there's a base, it's divided by class, obviously. The same people who hated Chavez hated Maduro, and many of them live in the United States. But life got hard under Maduro. I mean, how many millions of Venezuelans fled the country under dangerous conditions and coming up the Darien Gap just because they couldn't survive in their own country? So, I mean, I think that in some ways it transcended politics. I mean, I think there's probably a core base of support of organized groups that still exist, maybe 30, 40% that are still understand themselves as Chavistas, as revolutionaries. They understand the intervention in political terms, in historical terms, as a violation of sovereignty. And then there's a lot of people who just thought Maduro was a dictator. Life got bad. Life was good under Chavez. Life got bad under Maduro. And probably happy that he has been deposed.
So, to think about this in the terms of the history of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America, which you've written about so much, there's been a lot of talk about this as a return to some previous earlier era of gunboat diplomacy, whatever. What do you think is new in what the Trump administration did, in literally going and kidnapping this guy? What is new and different, and what is old? How do you put this into a framework of the way America has historically operated when it comes to Latin American regimes, particularly those that we don't like?
Yeah, everything old is new again. First, let me say that the question of whether Maduro was good or bad or legitimate or illegitimate is one question. Another question is the question of sovereignty, national sovereignty, and who gets to decide it. And a good part of Latin America's history with the United States, going back well into the 19th century, is a demand on the part of Latin American statesmen that the United States do not intervene, that they recognize the absolute sovereignty of Latin American nations. FDR in 1933 finally conceded that point and recognized, and this really laid the foundation for what we think of as international law, that no nation has the right to unilaterally decide that the sovereignty of another country isn't valid. And so acts like this, in which the United States unilaterally decide that Maduro has to go regardless of support, is really a turning point. It's really a violation of that ideal. The ideal of sovereignty is cherished. I mean, Latin America is a country that has had Texas taken from them, but half of Mexico. Panama was shaved off of Colombia to build the canal. Between 1898 and 1992, the United States carried out 42 successful coups, and those weren't even the ones that weren't successful. In 1898, the United States took Puerto Rico and seized Cuba. It occupied Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua for extended periods of time. It bombed Veracruz. It invaded Mexico. I mean, there's a long, long history of U.S. intervention in Latin America. The thing that this operation most closely resembles is two things. One, I think most everybody knows or has heard of is Manuel Noriega, and in 1989, Operation Just Cause, where it was billed as a police action, and George H.W. Bush sent about 30,000 troops in to capture Noriega, and then he was brought back to the United States, and he was tried. Noriega was a CIA asset in the 1980s. He was key in Iran-Contra. He was an ally of George H.W. Bush, but he had served his purpose especially when it was found out that he was playing both sides. He was selling information to the Cubans. He was working with Mossad. He was working with the CIA. It's Panama. Panama is like that crossroads. It's always that emporium section of the world in which like information is traded, and Noriega was key in that. And so the United States brought Noriega back, tried him, and found him guilty, and he died. I don't know if he was released or he died in the U.S. jail. I'm not trying to remember. But the other one, of course, is Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti in 2005, another coup that was organized not directly by the United States, but by democracy promotion groups that were associated with the United States, funded by things like AID and the National Endowment for Democracy. U.S. Marines went into Haiti, put a gun to Aristide's head. Aristide, of course, being a former liberation theologian priest who became president of Haiti twice, and flew him to the Congo. Gave him a minute to pack his bags and flew him to the Congo. So that's another example of the U.S. The other way that Haiti also plays out analogous to this is that even before that, Aristide was the victim of a previous coup under George H.W. Bush, and he was restored by Bill Clinton to the presidency, but only on the condition that he accept a series of neoliberal economic reforms that are similar. Haiti doesn't have oil, it barely has rice, but Clinton insisted that Haiti open up its economy to Florida and Alabama rice and Arkansas rice, and devastated Haiti's peasant economy. So there's another example of this kind of using the threat of coercion in order to force economic reforms that benefit the United States. So yes, oil is important and obviously part of the calculations of why the United States was concerned with Venezuela, but Haiti didn't have any oil.
What I hear you saying, Greg, is that in some ways, as shocking to a lot of people as what Trump is doing, it's not necessarily fundamentally different than what the United States has done not 100 years ago, but just a few decades ago under presidents who are not considered widely to be as lawless, perhaps. So is there anything in particular that, or should we really just understand this is basically the continuation of a very long history of the U.S. deposing leaders in Latin America didn't like, a kind of an era that never really has ended? The U.S. has basically always just continued to do it, and what Trump has done is nothing particularly new here.
Well, this is the question, right? This is the question about Trump. How much of it is continuity and how much of it is innovation and something radically new? Behind most of his outrages stand a long history of policies made by bipartisan administrations before him. I mean, the drug war itself, which Trump at first used to try to isolate Maduro before, just directly going to oil, is 50 years old and has been funded by every president, Democratic or Republican, ever since. And there's been plenty of outrages. They tend to be kept in the background, though, right? You don't really hear about, the DEA killing 400 peasants in 2019, or you don't hear much about Pinochet's involvement in the cocaine trade. I think what Trump does is he turns it into spectacle. He strips all the pretense away. And this, of course, is not just in Latin America. This is his historical role, right? To strip the pretense of liberal internationalism away and reveal pure politics and pure power politics, whether they be transactional or coercive. And so that, I think, is what is unique about Trump. I think it's a sign of imperial weakness. I don't think that you go and do the kind of action that you do in Venezuela, and even the openly boasting that it's about oil, that we're getting our oil back. It's our oil. You know, there's lots of ways of getting oil, right? They could have made a deal with Maduro, and there were sectors within his administration that wanted to normalize relations and just establish economic interests are always ideologically determined to some degree. And so when Trump says it's about oil, that in a way is a new thing, right? That I'm not going to hide behind the liberal dressing of the rules-based order. I'm just going to talk about it in pure power, and I'm going to cosplay being a colonial plunderer. But I think it has more to do with wanting to establish a show of dominance. And the United States has explicitly said under Trump that it has given up its role as the kind of superintendent of a global liberal order in which all countries play by the same set of rules concerning property relations and trade relations and whatnot. And Trump, it's written it down in his latest national security strategy document. It said those days are gone. The world is now organized by a kind of fragmented balance of power in which regional hegemons, be it China, Russia, or the United States, are responsible for organizing their hinterlands.
This has been a free preview of my conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.